Thank you to the chair and ranking member, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. I'm going to continue on Israel. Gaza, Israel has a right to defend itself, and the U.S. needs to be a partner with Israel in defending itself against those who would annihilate it. Hamas, Iranian-backed militias, Hezbollah, Houthis, Iran itself. I celebrated on April 14 when the U.S. helped Israel, together with other nations, knock down drones and missiles fired from Iran into Israel. Palestinians have a right to live. Palestinians have a right to live and not to be collectively treated as if they're part of a terrorist group when they're not. Most in Gaza are not Hamas. The vast majority in the West Bank are not Hamas. And while I support the U.S. effort to give Israel tools to defend itself against those who would annihilate it, I have been disappointed and expressed it publicly that the Israeli effort to support humanitarian aid to civilians, Israeli discussion about a future for Palestine, the slow pace of allowance of aid, the commission of violence against Palestinians on the West Bank, in some instances escorted by IDF reservists and Border Patrol officials, make this look to many that it is not just a defense against Hamas, but that it is a larger effort to target Palestinians. The administration, at Senator Van Hollen's request, and others of us joined in that request, in February announced a new policy, National Security Memorandum 20, that required recipients of U.S. military aid to meet two criteria. First, that the military aid would be used in accord with international law, and second, those receiving military aid, any nation receiving military aid, had to cooperate with U.S.-supported humanitarian efforts. The administration certified that Israel was meeting both of those pillars of NSM 20. The first pillar about whether military aid is being used in accord with international law is a murky one because of the way Hamas embeds in civilian populations, but I'll be blunt. I don't think the second pillar regarding humanitarian aid is that murky. And this is what I want to engage with you on. If Israel was engaged in sufficient effort to provide humanitarian aid, the U.S. wouldn't have to be building a jerry-rigged pier off the coast of Gaza, deploying Virginians from Fort Houston elsewhere to do it. You would see a higher pace of humanitarian aid being delivered through border crossings in Israel into Gaza. You would not see Cindy McCain, the widow of a former Senate Foreign Relations Committee member, executive director of the World Food Program, saying that there's, quote, full-blown famine in northern Gaza. I don't think you'd see USAID Administrator Power publicly stating that it's credible to assess that there is famine in Gaza. The news since Sunday has been that the Israeli Defense Forces want to do a strategic pause in some military operations in Gaza every day to allow humanitarian aid to get to more Palestinians, and they are being attacked by Prime Minister Netanyahu and members of the cabinet for their effort to do some pauses in Gaza to allow humanitarian aid. So as the leader of our State Department and USAID in this remit, how can we conclude that there is sufficient humanitarian aid being allowed by Israel into Gaza on this set of facts?
Senator, thank you for that set of comments and questions. I wouldn't say there is sufficient humanitarian aid going into Gaza by no stretch of the imagination, but it is not because Israel is trying to impede it. There are a whole set of complex factors at work, among which is the extremely poor security conditions, for instance, on the other side of Kerem Shalom. I was on a long discussion, a phone call this morning with our embassy in Jerusalem, as well as our special envoy, Lise Grande, and she and we are working assiduously to help untangle some of the issues, and some of them are quite difficult to get at, because as the IDF has stepped back, various violent actors have stepped in, to the point that even the much diminished Hamas enforcers cannot get control of independent families and gangs and so forth. So that is a huge piece of what is going on right now. The risk factors for humanitarian workers are at the very uppermost levels of intolerability for the UN and other NGOs. But we're working across the board on these issues with the Israeli government, with the IDF, with COGAT, and they are doing these pauses. There's obviously a lot of politics at play around many issues related to Gaza, but the fact is we are getting partnership and cooperation. It's just a fraught situation.
I'm over my time, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I don't want us to lose credibility. You know, we can't control the activities of other nations, but we can control our own. And when we render a conclusion that Israel is sufficiently cooperating with the United States on the delivery of humanitarian aid, at the same time as we're having to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a star-crossed effort to build an unworkable pier to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. And if we render a conclusion that Israeli actions are sufficient when the Israeli government is engaged in a significant war of words against their own IDF trying to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza, where it makes us look like that we lose our own credibility by blessing an effort that is thus far entirely insufficient. I yield back.